Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ISC2 Think Tank webinar. It's been a while since we've had a roundtable like this, and I'm happy to be joined by Josh, Steve, and Mirka here from our sponsor, Proofpoint. We're going to be talking about safeguarding your data in an AI-powered world, and what does that mean? Well, AI is kind of changing how we interact with the data across the enterprise, and there's a lot of pitfalls that I found in just talking to my friends and colleagues. And so we're going to be unpacking some of those complex data security challenges and talking about some ways that hopefully we can get in front of it and exhibit the kind of controls that are expected of us. Before I bring our guests on, though, just a quick housekeeping video, and I'll be right back in less than 60 seconds.
This is Think Tank, a webinar series where subject matter experts discuss and debate current and timely security topics using their experience and thought leadership while answering questions from the audience.
I think a lot of organizations are taking security more seriously than ever before.
At the end of the day, you cannot protect what you do not know you have.
Here are a few housekeeping notes to keep in mind. This webcast is interactive and we want your questions. Please submit via the questions tab and we'll address as many questions as possible during the time we have for this webinar. Don't forget to leave your feedback and comments, as well as a rating in the Rate This tab. We take all feedback and comments seriously, and we want to hear from you. CPE credits will be submitted for ISC2 members within 5 to 10 business days. If the presentation is freezing, please refresh your browser. Now, get ready for Think Tank.
Welcome on, everybody. Josh, big thanks to the fine folks at Proofpoint for bringing you in off the road for a little bit and joining us here today. Why don't we use that as an opportunity to kind of set the stage? You were saying before we went live, you're on the road 3 out of 4 weeks a year. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this and had a front row seat to it. What's it look like from your perspective?
You know, a lot of organizations are just trying to figure out exactly how they get their hands around the topic of managing AI and managing generative AI in general. When we look at it from a threat perspective, we've been pretty static up until the past couple years with the same top 3 exfiltration methods across the world, right? Number 1, everyone can understand and expect: email. Email is your number 1 business communication method. It's going to always be your number 1 data exfiltration channel. For a very, very long time, number 2 has been removable media. People plugging in a USB device, a SD card, etc., moving data and taking it away. However, this is swapped with what was originally number 3 position now, and that is web upload. The ability to go to sites and move data, exfiltrate it from the organization. And the primary reason that has happened is the explosion of generative AI, right? We have moved to a world where more and more sensitive data in an organization is being errantly shared with public, unsecured generative AI tools being loaded into those models by accident. And that has now driven so many organizations to react and say, hey, how do we approach this? How do we secure against this threat, right? And of course, we run into a lot of organizations who have taken the hardline approach that we try and coach against, which is stop it. Let's block all generative AI, right? So a lot of what I'm doing is working with organizations to say, you know, it's not really the right path. We don't want to turn around and shut the door. I liken it to organizations, or if you're going to go get your house built, right? Do you want to work with the company that uses power tools or the company that's still using hand saws and hammers? So it's really organizations trying to get their balance around how do we enable the business while simultaneously trying to negate or manage the risk posed by generative AI and the sensitive data in the organization.
Now, good points. And you mentioned web uploads was the previous contender, but burning up the charts being the Gen AI. But technically, the users are doing web uploads too, when you think about it to that. Mirka, you said you've kind of seen this movie. You know how it ends. We've had this problem with everything from shadow cloud implementations to other things. What's kind of your perspective? Because I think the four of us here probably have enough experience. We probably talk a lot about what's happened in the past, but this one seems to be a little bit of repeat.
Absolutely. And I like what Josh was just saying. I mean, what we really have to think about is where is the data going, right? You want to follow the data. And when you look at security foundations, you always want to know, identity, who's allowed to access a specific set of data. And with agentic AI, the problem is that you've got APIs, you've got programs, right, that are accessing different databases, communicating with each other. But who has the right to access? Where are the credentials? Where are they stored? How can they be used in an authorized manner? And also, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate auditing functions so you can review proper behavior through logging mechanisms to make sure that you don't have any unauthorized access to data. And, it's really interesting when I look at the fact that machine learning and also large language models, the combination, which is now deemed AI, it's been around for multiple decades already. It's just that in the last several years, it's become widely available to everybody and become mainstream. And I was thinking the other day that as I'm renting a car and my phone, right? I mean, I use CarPlay. And so right now the cars are even communicating with my phone. And on my phone, it says, hey, this is the speed limit and you're going a couple miles over or you're going under. But what I'm noticing is that it's not even correct, right? So the speed limit, I'm currently in Europe, it says you can drive 110 kilometers per hour, right? But my phone says, hey, it should be 90, you're going way over the speed limit. And then I'm thinking, who's getting this information? Is it the insurance company, the car rental company, the police, right? And who's allowed to have this access and what are they allowed to do with the data? And so as I look at the whole foundation, we really have to know what data are we giving to what entity and what are they doing with that information? And I'm very concerned about areas of data exfiltration because do we actually have the tools in use that can tell organizations when there's PII that's shared and whether or not it has the ability to have unauthorized individuals have access to it? And then what do we do about it? So I know that tools are getting created, very good tools, but we really, from an organizational perspective, have to make sure that we're actually implementing these tools. And we also have to educate the organization so that they're aware that in some sensitive environments, you really want to be careful about which AI tools you utilize. I mean, how many of us have been on Zoom calls and you have this automated note taker, and then all of a sudden you realize that you're talking about something really sensitive? Well, where's that note taker storing that information? So,
right.
Yeah.
I've been on meetings where the note takers seem to outnumber the live participants as well. But you talk about kind of the access to the data, and I've been having conversations around this with the tools. It's like, okay, as a user, I may have access to certain things, and we'll assume for practical argument that it's the right access to data within my enterprise. But now you've got an agent which may have its own identity and own rights, or it may be brokering mine into the environment. So there's a lot of nuance between how agents and sub-agents and things start to interact with our data. But I too am afraid, we saw the Samsung case when this, Gen AI wave first started crashing of uploading sensitive information to just ChatGPT, I think it was. And that's, I think, one of the bigger worries that are out there is, what are the users doing with this? Not necessarily within our walls, but maybe exfiltrating and using tools that maybe we don't even know about. I can spin up a domain tomorrow and connect an API over to Anthropic, and you never know. Your next gen firewall doesn't know its domain, and you got to have 5 layers of domain reputation checking on it. But Steve, you've kind of been working on the control plane for some of this stuff. What are some suggestions for some of these types of problems that you're seeing are being, I guess, implemented or at least somewhat effective, if not very effective?
So I think for me, if I'm managing security around AI, generative AI specifically, like you said, we've been doing machine learning for a long time. The first is, how are my employees using this? I've got marketing. They might have, pre-release information. Are they out there having it write marketing materials and being in training mode and letting that out there? Do I have coders that are out there doing the same kind of thing? And so that really is where we start off with some policy and some technical controls, along with training of our people to understand how they should be using it, when they should be using it, and what the risks are. The second area I see a lot of this is I'm bringing generative AI into it. You just talked about these agents I'm bringing in. I'll bring in something like, Akamai segmentation, and it's got this natural language query capability that my junior analyst now can do more senior things, which is a great capability. But then my finance might be using this, and all of a sudden, there's requirements with EU law in states like Colorado that I'm going to have to be able to audit this. So do I have, my audit capability? Do I have forensics capability set up? And the last area where I do this is if I'm offering this as a service, if it's public facing, if I'm in healthcare or finance or whatever, and customers are making big decisions on this. And that's where I love the OWASP. OWASP originally did those, top 10 vulnerabilities. Then they put out the top 10 most common coding vulnerabilities for API programming. And now they have it for large language models. And I would add DDoS to that current list. But then you need those external, kind of those firewall in front of your external facing controls. So those are the three groups where I kind of think about how to protect and what I need to go back to. But again, both of the other speakers are dead on. It's about the data and it's about the threat as well.
A couple of things you brought up. One, I want to share an anecdote from a friend of mine, and then I want to get into kind of some of those frameworks and regulations a little bit, because my colleague we're having a chat about this, and he said, he said you could kind of DDoS an organization that's deployed a chat bot by just spamming the chat bot and chewing up all their tokens and sending them a giant bill. He's like, it's like a financial DDoS at that point. So I think things like API gateways and some throttling capabilities and such are probably another layer to add to this. You mentioned the OWASP stuff. I know that the Cloud Security Alliance has put out some great control guidance. It also dovetails with some of the ISO standards. I haven't seen a lot of wide adoption yet. It still seems like everybody's leaning more into the innovation and acceleration of this necessarily than some of the controls. I don't know, Josh, like I said, you get to see a lot of these with customers and prospects out in the wild. Are you seeing them adopt some of these types of frameworks, or at least begin to explore their usage?
I think what most organizations are doing is they're waiting to see what framework wins, right? Because they don't want to do a lot of investiture. And here's the framework we're going to align to, and then it turns around to not be the preeminent framework to solve the problem. What I do see is a lot more from a solutioning perspective. Here's our business need. How are we going to solution this regardless of whether it's in a particular framework, right? As an example, we'll take the public generative AI right now. Let's just say public ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. Using as the proof point guy, I'll use us as a good example. We're going in, we're talking about how the business needs to continue to enable use of these public generative AI tools while simultaneously curtailing functions like the ability to upload files that contain sensitive data, curtailing the ability to paste sensitive data into these, or even up to implementing technologies that we have in scope that keep people from being able to type sensitive data elements directly into the input fields for these large public domains, right? So it's use it, but how do we redact and or secure against the sensitive data being a piece of that? When we figure out how it fits into either our organizational framework or we align to an AI governance framework. Very much, I'm prior military, right? I look at it from a triage perspective. I think most organizations are in that space at the moment. We don't need to know exactly the extent of the injury. We just need to immediately react to curb the blood loss, right? So that we can stabilize the organization, so that then we can look at how we're going to approach long-term solutions and care for what is ailing us. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I think triage is where probably a lot of security teams are now with the different implementations, right? We've got, when this first started, a lot of people were like, okay, I'm going to go open AI and it's going to be in my Azure tenant and I can wrap all my typical Microsoft controls around this, from DLP to content moderation, token throttling, you name it. But it all comes back down to the data, and I think the data flows. Ricker, you said, you've seen some of this before. Are there suitable areas where perhaps we already have a framework that can be applied to a lot of this? Because I hear a lot of people saying, well, if I'm building agents internally, even if they're using external APIs for LLMs, it's still just AppSec at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I've actually liked what NIST has come out with. So NIST has created an AI risk framework. And I see that a lot of organizations are starting to look at it, even globally. I mean, ANISA has its version as well. And a lot of organizations are doing acceptable use policies for AI. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, there isn't yet a unifying framework, right? But many organizations are looking at, well, if we do want to use AI tools, and of course, it gives you organizational efficiency, you're automating the boring, and it's really useful in organizations. So you do have to embrace it. But many enterprises are looking at, well, do we stand up our own internal solution so that we're not sending data to an entity where we don't know what's happening to it, so we can have more control of the data? Or, just looking at what are the risks to the organization, depending on what tools are getting used. And as somebody else mentioned, right, you want to make sure that employees are not just downloading any kind of AI tool, but that you actually have some kind of control and educate your organization about what risks exist if they try to use some tool that maybe they're not making the organization aware of.
Well, let's talk about kind of the tooling. I mentioned kind of a few of them in the Azure space here, but marrying up the tools kind of to the controls that you may already have in place, because again, coming back to this and treating it almost like the fundamentals of application security or data security seems like a good space to kind of fit what we have without necessarily having to go out and buy a AI security platform or such. Steve, are you seeing those types of technologies come up, or are you seeing people say what they've got in their toolbox and kind of beat it to fit and paint it to match, as my 8th grade shop teacher used to say?
So I think there's a mix here. We've got some very specific tools out there. Some tools market themselves to, like I mentioned earlier, the marketing team, or to the code development team, or if you're going to go be an author, there's a 3 or 4 generative AIs that are just to help you write a book. And so some are going to very domain specific generative AIs. And that is something that I've got to allow my employees to use, because if I don't, they're just going to create a backdoor. And then now I'm not going to have visibility on what they're doing. And so going to Josh's statement earlier, you've got to work with your employees to enable them to be successful. The other half of this is where, Josh private, I mean, mention public, do you want to go to a private generative AI where I'm restricting it and I'm maximizing, that ability to know what's going on in our organization? A lot of us right now are doing digital archaeology, trying to find information inside our own company about what the latest is on some aspect or what our stance is. And so moving into more of that private, but I really think going back to the final point here is more and more we're going to have to get to specific AI tools. A normal WAF, web application firewall, is not going to find all the API threats. An API firewall isn't going to find all the generative AI threats. So you need to make sure you understand the platforms you have and whether or not they can migrate to include the latest threat techniques. Business logic abuse is not something a WAF can find. And so I'm seeing a lot of people start to move towards more customized capabilities, and pressing back on the vendors more to understand what their security is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mika.
Yeah, so some vendors have been using AI for a very long time, and especially in call centers. And when you're thinking about hospitals, when you're thinking about financial institutions, you are dealing with PII, right? Personal identified information, in the healthcare or financial or some other situation. And vendors they need to do this for regulatory requirements. They need to be able to anonymize this data, right? Or somehow protect it. So if there's a breach, right, you won't have access to it. So there are vendors that have been creating solutions for this for quite a number of years. But I think organizations need to ask the right questions to really understand what is being done with their data when you have these tools. I use a lot of different tools. I mean, you look at any kind of, if you're in Zoom meetings, something pops up and says, hey, do you want me to do this? Because I'm smart, right? Or Word documents, or most of the applications I'm using has some little icon that pops up as, hey, I can help you. And I'm like, I don't want that help right now. But, I might in the future. But I want to first understand what is it doing and how is it doing it? And then where are things stored, right? Again, I will always come back to follow the data, right? And then look at when it's something sensitive, how is it actually protected? I look at it as DLP on steroids, right? Data loss protection. A lot of these solutions you had to enter all this data to say, this is PII, this is what it looks like, hash it, right? The same has to be done when you're using generative AI, right? You have to have the intelligence to know what is sensitive data and then protect it appropriately.
Well, we had a question come in and kind of sounds a little bit like the old government days. So Josh, I'm going to drop this one over to you. And that's like things about, you get a sensitive document. It's got headers on it telling you handling instructions and the like. Do we have to kind of go back to those days? Because even in that case, if I were to say upload a PDF or a Word doc that has those kinds of markings, the LLM is not going to care necessarily. I'm going to have to rely on things like tagging in the docs and DLP and such. But is that a way to kind of get past some of the user considerations that Steve was bringing up and maybe make our users a little bit more aware of their actions when they're happening?
It's kind of amusing because what we're seeing is the use of generative AI, and let's say we take it in-house. Let's say we get a tenanted solution for ChatGPT or Claude or something of that nature, and we start connecting it to our data sources. It has actually exposed many organizations who believe they had strong data governance to not understand the data that's in the repositories they're giving access to, right? So what generative AI in general is doing is it's exposing flaws in what we believe we had from a program perspective. And it is pushing us back to our core fundamentals. Do we know what data we have? Do we know where that data is? Have we identified that data in some method that flags or tags it, whether it's those nice visible labels or metadata tags, right? That would ride with the document. And so we can turn around and apply traditional data loss preventions, data loss protection rules to what's happening in generative AI by leveraging it as a channel, right? It's just another channel like writing it to USB or emailing it is. So we do need to apply those common concepts and just treat it like we do with the same control planes we have today. But when we look at AI in general, I look at it from again, I'll take that fun little military experience, right? The first army with bows and arrows beat the army without. The first mounted cavalry beat the ground troops. The first with tanks won, right? So you have to use these capabilities that AI actually provides to assist in this battle. So as we talk about things like large language models, we're using that as well as a contextual element. No longer are we looking for just sensitive PII elements that you can do with traditional rules or looking for a label tag. We're also going to run that document through LLM processing. And we're going to say, that's a tax document, that's an invoice, that's a contract, so that we can start to make beyond small data element decisions in broader business context, right? I like to do this in the US. I like this as an example. If there's a couple national IDs or US Social Security numbers, and AI classifier says this is a tax document, if it's March when everyone's sending their W-2s home, do we care? Probably not. But if it's the common corporate tax season of September and that LLM classifier is telling you, hey, these are tax documents leaving, then we care, right? That's when we care. And we have to start using more modern approaches, using these things like large language models to help protect, as well as using AI baked into the solutions to help our analysts summarize the mass amount of events and content and context of what's happening so that we can equivalently fight fire with fire.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague of mine in the manufacturing space, and they were exploring an agent that processed emails into a group inbox. And his worry was, well, if it's parsing all the text, someone could send an email with a jailbreak or a ignore your previous instructions type of prompt. And he tested it. And he's like, he blew it up. And he's like, okay, we got to put some filtering in. So now he's like, okay, I got to get my email filters right before some of this even comes into the environment. I know Proofpoint's got a long history.
Prompt engineering.
So in that space, yeah.
When we look at what Proofpoint's stance is, we've been the human-centric data security provider for a long time. And we look at things very plainly. What happens with humans? They get socially engineered. They have access to data and they make mistakes with that data, right? And they're just prone to oversharing or, let's just say, messing up with their credential sets. You turn around and you look at AI. If we're moving into a world where we're becoming the human and agentic security company. And when you look at AI, all you do is replace social engineering with prompt engineering. And everything that those AI agents are doing is exactly the same thing from a vulnerability and risk perspective when you're looking at humans, right? It's all parallel. Instead of social engineering, though, it's watching for prompt engineering. It's making sure as data is coming even inbound into the organization that certain strings, certain prompt engineering, it isn't existent in the document, right? So when we look at how we're going to be securing against that, it's take the AI and treat it with the same context of what you're doing with the humans. Because what its job to do is replicate what people are doing. So it's going to suffer the exact same vulnerabilities. And how do we work around that?
I like that concept. I think it bears fruit because I think there's an opportunity there to simplify your threat modeling around some of these things if you can treat that context. I don't know. You look like you had a moment there. You wanted to speak up on that one, Steve. You were going like this.
I was going to jump on it, Ed. We have to remember the threat gets a vote. Absolutely do. If you haven't looked at Fraud GPT or Worm GPT, all the advantages we're talking about taking, the cyber criminals are taking those too. Everything we're talking about at a national level, there is, this is a national strategic imperative for a lot of governments. So the speed of which we're taking advantage of this, we've got to have the right tools in place because it is going to move fast.
I think you're spot on with that. Well, I'm curious, Mirka, what do you think of the splitting of the user behavior versus, say, the LLM behavior? Because I think to your point, Josh, they behave similarly when you interact with them. It's just that maybe the vector or the vehicle is different.
I do think the vehicle is different, but I started thinking of, what are things that we can't control or we can't yet really sanity check? And the one area that I found really fascinating is language translation, right, on the fly. So you have a multinational company and it's all around the globe. And now with agentic AI, you can do simultaneous translations. But how do you know the translation is correct? And how do you know that some sentences won't be changed in meaning, right? So you have disinformation campaigns. Like, how do you check that?
So I was listening to a news broadcast. I think it was something on BBC News or something the other day, talking about generative AI use by terrorist organizations, specifically around translation, trying to get their word out, and that they are more cautious than companies are because they don't want the message to be distorted or come out inaccurately, which I thought was just kind of a hilarious parallel to where we are in the world here. We've talked a little bit about some of the controls and mechanisms, but we have a number of questions coming in about, hey, this is great because I think, Josh, you might have mentioned this. This can summarize large amounts of data for us. I was just doing a tabletop exercise early this morning with a group, and they were talking about things like Security Copilot and being able to use natural language processing to query large data sets and what a boon it is to their operations. Do we think that we are keeping pace perhaps with the adversaries in some of this? And I kind of want to go around the table for everybody to get their feedback. That is this as much of a benefit for us, I guess you could say, as it is for them, or is it just a single rising tide and all the boats are rising? And Steve, I'll start with you.
So I think that that the adversaries are more focused, and right now there is a challenge with us on the defensive side. I will go back to the day when I had one of my security engineers go to somebody in the DevSecOps and say, hey, you need to add file integrity management to this capability you're building, which is just these little scripts of code. And it's like they're not on the same planet. And the challenge was my engineer didn't have the skills to develop the right language and the requirements. That's where we are today in the cybersecurity side. That's where we are on the operational side with this generative AI. We need to build our skills up. We need to make sure if somebody is going out for marketing and in a public, GPT, that they're saying, don't train on this data. They're taking the right steps. So I think we have a lot of skill development on our side to make sure people understand both how to optimize and how to understand what risks they're accepting.
No, that's a good point. And we had a comment come in, Josh, before I toss this to you about it seems as though an in-house Defender AI can be trained to recognize inadvertent exposures, other patterns. These things are really good at pattern matching. Are there some ways, I think Splunk even released a massive log set to do some fine tuning on with. Are there things that we should be looking at from an internal use of this for our security teams beyond whatever is being added to our existing security stack from our vendor space?
We definitely should, right? We need to find ways to use these functions as much as we can. At our recent customer conference, Proofpoint has for years with our managed services team been leveraging AI triage agents and AI investigators. to comb through our customers' events and help them identify things that are real. We're actually
Can you break those two down a little bit more detail
Yeah.
for me?
So if you're looking at data security, right, data loss prevention, the most time-consuming thing is first-line triage. Is this a real event? Is this a false positive? Is this benign? So we built over a very long time the capabilities for our AI agents that have been running in kind of like a machine learning, working through playbooks methodology to look at these and help decide, right? And then they radiate it up to our managed services professionals who, of course, you always need the human lens, who then go, yes or no, this is a real event. This is a real incident. Let's push it to the customer, right? And get this something into the addressable space. Our investigators are more on the insider risk or threat hunting aspect because we collect a lot of data. We go, here's something from what happened at this company. Here's an example of what happened. Go find this. Comb through the data and find examples of this kind of behavioral patterns occurring, right? So what we've done is actually for this upcoming year, we already have a capability that does summarizations of events, can help an analyst triage in a rapid fashion. We're turning around and releasing the agent into our technology stack so that as an organization, you can augment your data security with AI agents to do these tasks to help keep up. But, back to that original question, as I look at it, we're always behind, right? The threat actors don't have regulatory compliance to fight with. They're always going to be ahead, and they've been ahead in every single facet the entire time there's been information security. It's just a lot harder to climb the wall of a castle and breach it than it is to put a whole new row of bricks on top. So as long as we're working diligently to keep up, we can reinforce even though they're ahead, right? So being able to leverage these functions and say, yes, this is something that matters. Here's how we're going to approach it. Here's how we're going to actually use this advanced technology to defend us. That's the step. And that's one of the things that Proofpoint and many other vendors are working through right now. How do we lay this in at every level, right, to help go through this? We just released something on our inbound email threat channel, not even data security related, that now we detect prompt injection on inbound emails. If the email comes in and it's got code that looks like prompt injection, we scrape it straight out of the email before it lands in an inbox. So if that person copy paste stuff or Copilot's looking at your email to give you a summary, it doesn't errantly get triggered by prompt injection, pull all your files and shuttle them out the door.
Good to know. But I like the two models and two particular use cases. And I see a lot of organizations that are experimenting with some open source capabilities that they've seen. I mean, we've seen tools come out from the major frontier providers like Aardvark for code analysis. We've got CodeMender out there as well. Mirka, do you think we're keeping up, or do you think the asymmetry, shall we say, that Josh brought up is kind of our Achilles heel here?
I think there's always going to be asymmetry because when you're doing the protecting, you have to protect everything and from every angle. Yet a criminal, right, they might just find your one spot of weakness and, they're ahead of the game. And as Josh said, one of the issues that we have as defenders is that we have so many either legal barriers or regulatory barriers where the criminals don't have any of that, and they can be very agile. But at the same time, we can't forget that we've had advanced firewalls, we've had SOC tools, right, for the Security Operations Center, where they've been utilizing AI for many, many years, even over a decade, to make sure that there's just so much information that you can. Think about event logging. Think about a large organization that has hundreds of thousands of devices sending logging data, right? And you're using these AI tools to really educate, learn, create the intelligence of what events are really not anything to deal or to care about versus events that may lead to an actual security incident. And then how do you automate being able to give the threat intelligence and the information so that a human then knows that, okay, they need to look and investigate further. And I always like, somebody recently told me about there's intelligence versus wisdom, right? And intelligence is the ability to acquire and process information. That's what AI is used for. But then wisdom requires, at least today still, a human, where you have the ability to make judgments and use empathy and understand, the complexities of life and situations. So I do think that the criminals, I'm not sure if they're ahead per se, because I do think that there's a lot of security companies that are utilizing AI to provide protections and information as best as we can. And it's always going to be a learning experience, right? Something's going to break, somebody's going to breach something, we learn, and you then create better models.
I like the distinction there, but go ahead. There, you had a comment.
Yeah, I want to build on the innovative castle wall, and the attacker only has to get it right once. And one of the tools I really love is the MITRE attack framework. So again, and this goes back to my roots as an airborne ranger. I love this methodology of, the threat has to do a recon, then they have to come in and get forces to break in. They have to get the right malware to figure out how to take advantage of the vulnerability they found, and then they have to take actions inside the computer to deliver their payload and execute their business plan, their hacker criminal business plan. The MITRE attack framework has laid that out. And what I, as a CISO, love to do is say, okay, where do I have my tools spread out? So yeah, I have Proofpoint here. I have Akamai here, pick your flavor. There should be something in every column. Exfiltration should have something. Lateral movement should have some kind of segmentation. And as you look across that, that's the way I like to think about building those tools in. And now we take generative AI and we say, where do I do all these different steps so it's not one thing I'm depending on?
No, and you never want to depend on just the one thing, but I like your use of the attack framework, right? We can follow the chain and then put the controls in place kind of along that chain. We had a question I've been sitting on for a little while here, and I want to bring it up because I'm seeing more of this, at least from a, I don't know, innovation/experimentation sort of phase. And that is, what changes when we bring things on-prem? We're not making calls to frontier models via APIs or other means, but we're, say, setting up Ollama and running some smaller models at the edge to decrease cost, increase speed, performance. There's been talk of this concept of like agent sprawl in my organization, which to Mirka's point about following the data, I think is going to make it a lot harder, but at least it's still within our perimeter. Josh, are you seeing folks adopt that? And are you seeing that kind of agent sprawl become a problem on the data provenance and velocity of movement?
It's growing rapidly, yeah. Because if you want to stop the exfiltration possibility, you bring it in-house. Whether that in-house is you bring in something like Ollama, or you just do a tenanted solution of ChatGPT, or do corporate Copilot into your environment. Bringing it in-house stops a threat of exfiltration because you now have the models in-house under your control. You're not feeding a public model. However, you now open a whole new door of risk. Right? Because once you bring it in, the way you empower it is you connect it to your data sources and you let it use your data. Now, when you look at any of these, whether they're an agentic AI agent that's accessing data, whether it's a simple, more system-driven generative AI capability like Copilot that's accessing data, you have to now have guardrails around your data. First, you need to know what data it's accessing. You need to know what's in the repositories you're giving it access to. You need to understand the access control plane there, and are we in a successful state of managing that? And then you also have to be aware that those AI agents, a lot of them are using the newer MCP protocol, right? That will allow them to do this. And what MCP stands for is Model Context Protocol. And it kind of aggregates between APIs and normalizes data for the AI agent to reference and utilize. Sadly, it's a new protocol. It doesn't have a lot of native built-in security. It doesn't keep your access management. So we have to look at how are we building these functions and how are we ensuring that once we bring it in-house, if I'm going to go ask it a question, am I going to be able to return the CEO's salary? Am I going to be able to get information? You know, if I'm going to say, hey, is my passport out there in the an image of my passport? And it goes, no, but here's 7 passports for people in your organization we found in their OneDrive, right? How are we going to build in the controls then once we bring it in-house to say, here's the data thou shalt not touch, right? It's driven us at Proofpoint into having some really deep and granular conversations about data governance and shoring up data governance processes, because you have to know what data it's touching in order to be able to secure it as you bring these things in-house. So bringing them in-house stops the data exfiltration risk, but creates the potential data exposure risk and can really show holes in the way that you're managing your data internally.
Yeah, I think that's why so many people pump the brakes on the co-pilots and the like in the beginning. They're like, we got to get our data labeling, get our sensitivity labels locked down. We got to get some bit of control over this, regardless of how we're doing it. Because if I'm going outside, I could exfiltrate it. But if I'm inside, I could surface inappropriate material to the wrong person, right? So there's a healthy mix of problems for us to deal with here. While we're on the topic of problems, and we've got about 12, 13 minutes left, I want to talk about getting in front of this. The one thing that we've talked about is security controls and kind of following the data lineage and stuff, but we haven't really dug much into the human factor. Steve's mentioned it a little bit. As security leaders in our organization, whether you've got the title of CISO or not, I'm curious what's your point of view of the governance around this, the role of security with that governance, and maybe who else needs to be brought to the table? And if so, does this supersede an existing committee, council, or governance function, or is this an add-on to one? Amirka, I'll start with you and then go around the table and get your point of view, because I'm seeing this thing sliced so many different ways, and it's not like we don't have enough meetings to go to already.
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, a lot of this, the data sensitivity aspects also deal with privacy-related issues. So in many organizations, it is the data protection officer, the chief privacy officer. If your organization is large enough and you have a chief risk officer, right, that you kind of work together to really understand what is the risk to the organization by using some of these AI-related tools, knowing that you do want to have AI. I mean, you need to use agentic AI and generative AI tools. I mean, that's just the world we're going to continue to live in. But how do you then make sure that you have the right governance model in place within your organization? I mentioned before that having an AI acceptable use policy and also having some kind of education around what are the risks if you're starting to use tools that may not be authorized to use. So also making sure that employees know what is authorized, what is not authorized. If there is a tool they want to use, then to report it to either the chief or the security team or the privacy team, right? But there has to be a leadership collaboration so that there is an effective policy in place for the organization.
And hopefully some ways of detection of policy deviations and controls and blocks around that for the guardrails. Steve, what says you about the role of governance and the role of security leadership be playing in that activity?
So first of all, it comes back to what is a risk appetite? If I'm in a heavily regulated industry, healthcare, finance, something like that, then I have a lot of compliance requirements. I have a lot of auditability requirements that I need to build in early. And there, my key partner is vendor management. And to be honest, I always stay plugged into vendor management because if somebody goes and buys an AI tool, they're going to be the one that's going to let me know, hey, they didn't go through the security guardrails to bring in this tool, and I can go work with that partner and make sure they understand the risks they're taking, and that it's within the risk appetite of what our board and our risk committee, if you're in a large organization, is expecting of us. But I think ultimately here, through culture and technical controls, I need to build a environment where I have visibility. People are coming to me and not saying, hey, can I use this? But hey, how can I use this securely? If I can get that culture, that's probably the best thing I can do.
That's a good point. Comes back to not only awareness, but that shift in creating not necessarily a security culture, but at least a risk-aware culture, so that your user population and others can actually make informed decisions. Josh, take us out on a high note here as the event sponsor. Please don't make it all be doom and gloom.
No, I mean, the thing that I tell so many organizations as they're trying to get their hands around this is, first, take a breath. You don't need to, if you're just starting to explore a generative AI or AI models, you don't need to go build a completely new function, right? While it's good to have an AI governance function eventually when you get to that level of maturity, just look at what you're trying to do. If you're worried about data exfiltration to public generative AI, you have a data security team for that already, right? If you're looking into shadow AI, all right, who's running shadow IT? Let's expand functions. Let's just look at things in the scope and use the tools and capabilities we already have. Eventually, you'll find when it gets to the tipping point that now we need to have it as its own separate function. But so many organizations are getting wrapped around the axle and analysis paralysis and saying, man, it's new. We need to do this, but it's not, right? It's just a different piece of functionality that has done things that we've been doing for years. And it's a different channel. Right. So if someone came out with a new piece of removable media that's not USB or SD card, right, then you would simply go to your data security team and say, hey, can you find a way to do DLP on this the same way you've done it on USB and SD card? Yeah. Right. All right. Well, web upload, the ability for generative AI. How are we stepping in? Use what you've got first. Cover as many gaps as you can with what you've got. Get understanding of the data that you have. But most importantly, take a breath and not be extremely concerned and say, hey, this is what we've got to build a whole new governance group for this. We've got to build a whole new thing. We've got a staff. We've got to just take a minute, look at it, and just think of it in the same vein of how you've been doing things. And how do they apply to this situation today? And it's helped a lot of organizations that we talk to just go ahead and actually turn from trying to talk about this internally, how, to being able to actually roll into a process of engaging and beginning to mitigate the risk.
That's wise advice. And I've seen too many organizations stand up an entire AI third-party risk management program when they could just leverage the one they already have and put some model contract clauses in there about model training. But I think your point about, if you went to the data security people and said, can we have DLP on this new removable media, is a great analogy and makes me want to go into my closet and dig out my old SCSI-based zip drive from the 90s. But I digress. It's been a pleasure having you all on. I really do appreciate all of your time and getting away from the hectic part of the day to share your time with us and to share your insights. And folks, I want to take a moment and also direct you over to the attachments area. We've got a solution brief on Proofpoint Security for Gen AI. as well as a white paper and some other items over there that they've been kind enough to provide. So please avail yourself of those. Also, we've put our speaker LinkedIn profiles for all of our panelists up there as well. So if you'd like to follow us on that social platform, it's a great way to stay connected. And if you're maybe new to the profession, it's a great way to see how each of us have kind of evolved over our careers and perhaps chart your own career path as well. I also want to ask all of you to give us your thoughts. It's been a while since we've gotten to do a roundtable think tank format. We've done a lot of briefings lately. I miss this format. I think it's a lot of fun. But let us know what you think. Let us know if you got value out of this. And go beyond a star rating and give us your comments. We give those comments back to all of our panelists and our sponsors as well to make sure that we're continuing to improve the programming that we bring to you and not only meet your own professional educational needs, but also the needs of where your enterprise is today. And if you are catching us on the archive, fantastic. For those of you that are live, you can send this URL over to your colleagues who couldn't make it, and as well, they can view the archive. But it's also a great opportunity to update your communication preferences. We want to be sure you have enough advance notice of the topics that are relevant to you in your enterprise that you can join us live while we've got experts like these three here with us today. With that, everybody, I want to say thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I look forward to continuing our conversation very soon, everyone. Be well.